Okay, everybody, sorry about that. We are back on air. Sorry about that. We had technical difficulty. Okay, so I wrapped up Article 28, third-party risk management, and so let's just keep moving here real quick. Okay, so obviously, first inventory your PII data, and that's important because you need to inventory your information. So again, you know what the laws are, and the laws are calling for very specific things. But the very first thing you need to do is to understand where your data lies and how to inventory that. So the type of data, again, we talked about this, anything from geolocations to IP addresses, cookies, things that are not very obvious to folks, and also things like race, ethnic origin, gender. That's also part of Article 7 through 9 as well. And if you leverage the AWS tools called Macy, that basically says we can actually turn that on, and it'll basically go ahead and inventory and track where is your PII data, and it has all these regular expressions and other AI type stuff that actually can trace where the privacy data is. So you can use that to kind of classify where those databases are, and then once you have that in place, then you know what to do. Okay. So next slide is really what the bulk and meat of this whole session is. Okay, so I wanted to kind of cover the laws a little bit, and again, focus on the data elements of those laws so you understand what they are, and then understand where our data lies, right? So you're saying, okay, I know the laws now, and I have inventoried all of our PII data. So what's next? Okay. So what's next is obviously you need to set the protection parameters. You need to do risk assessment, and then you need to collect all the data, and then be able to also look at compliance and KPI reporting, right? So compliance reporting you should do early on, and then audit management. Now all these activities are actually evidence collection. So you must be saying, so what's new that you're telling me? Well, I'm actually going to show you in the next few slides what is the new that we're talking about, the actual delta. So evidence collection is some of it is easy and some of it is quite complex. So we'll detail that out. But I'll give you some high-level examples to think about here. Is S3 bucket versioning turned on? Okay, that's a test control that you should be running and making sure that the versioning is still on, right? Are the bucket global settings edit is set to off? So you certainly don't want to have your buckets to have a global setting to be on, so anybody can edit your buckets. That's not a good thing. Things like is your elastic load balancer cipher level? Is it at 1.2 or higher? By the way, for PCI folks, for all the compliance regulations are now calling for TLS to be 1.2 or higher. So 1.1, I think it's being retired as of the end of this June for PCI. So certainly you have to check the cipher level, right? And that's a controlled test, and you need to prove that to the auditor that you have very strong encryption turned on. Are the log correlation enabled for VPC subnets? So it's not just log collection for VPCs, that's most people get that right, but also for the subnets. And again, that's a controlled test that you need to run, and it'll come back with a response in the CLI, and it'll tell you that yes, VPC is turned on, log files turned on for these subnets. So all of that becomes your evidence collection, and you can show it to your auditor. So what does this look like actually? Can you just give a few examples? I'm going to give two examples for the VPC and S3, but before I do that, I just want to mention this high-level Gardner point, is that 95% of all cloud breaches will be due to customers' fault. Okay, so this is actually true so far, and there's a slide at the tail end that I'll show you how true this slide is. That yes, most of these issues are because of AWS and all these cloud providers have a lot of complexities built in terms of lots of services. Each of those services requires configurations, and if you misconfigure some of these services, it's going to have a catastrophic effect on your environment. So AWS shared security model. Okay, that's something that you need to understand before I dive in and tell you which specific data sets and what controls and how you want to run those controls and how you want to manage. You need to understand your responsibility and Amazon's responsibility. So Amazon's responsibility is to take care of the basic infrastructure, right? So making sure that the hardware is safe, everything is fenced in, the endpoints are protected, and so on and so forth. Where your responsibility comes in is all the data that you put into the cloud, all the applications that you're setting up, and networking and firewall configuration and encryptions and the client-side data encryption and so on. So all this stuff, the transport layer, everything you are responsible for. There's a lot of configurations involved, and you are responsible for those configurations. So in effect, you are responsible for the security of that. Okay, so again, something that people miss. I just want to kind of bring this out again, and this is an Amazon slide, by the way. Okay, so all right, that's great. I understand that. So what's a typical architecture for a GDPR or a compliance-specific architecture within Amazon? First of all, you're going to have a 3-tier reference architecture that's provided by Amazon. And you can actually implement this architecture very quickly using what is called cloud formation templates, which they provide. I have a link on the next slide for that. And this template will set up this infrastructure, which is you have a management VPC, VPC stands for Virtual Private Cloud. And then you have production VPCs, and then you could have multiple development VPCs. And if you notice, within the production VPC, there's a US East 1A and 1B, which means it's being replicated for high availability. And again, it's required by the compliance regulation. So this infrastructure has all these different services turned on, everything from S3, security groups, auto scaling, load balancers, Bayesian access, which is your jump drive, multi-zone is turned on, and it has encrypted RDSs and CloudWatch and so on. So you have to have this minimum as a starting point. Of course, you should have better than this, but this is your starting point. So be aware of this, and this is actually documented in the Amazon notes. Now, yes, you are trying to comply to GDPR regulation and pull all the evidences, the body of evidence for the auditors to see, but you should be following some kind of a security framework. And of course, NIST is the number one on the list. So you should take a look at these security controls that are noted here for NIST and the cloud formation templates, which I talked about. For the 3-tier architecture that's mapped to NIST is also in that link as well that you can execute. So again, these components are very, very important. Okay, so just a high-level summary before I dive into the evidence collection pieces, exact pieces, what they are. So in a traditional process of, let's say, PCI, because we have all the history with PCI customers, when some auditor will going to come in and it's going to ask you for tons of data. Like, I mean, on average, 200, 300 pieces of evidence is not uncalled for. And again, depending on how large is your infrastructure is. So they'll come on site and they will, look over your shoulder, take screenshots, and look at your scan results. And this activity will vary at least a week on site, if not more. And 3 more weeks, we'll have a follow-on, phone calls and email and so on. That's your traditional process today. On the cloud, unfortunately, it could be the same or it could be much worse if you don't automate. So you have to automate everything. And I'll talk about what this automation is and how to automate in the next slide. But if you had the automation in place, you can generate the audit data in real time throughout the year, not just time and point, and actually give the auditor access to this static data as well through a portal if needed, or via email. And then when the auditor does come on board to take a look at things, you can just basically give them access to the folder or the portal, whatever you have set up that has all the data in there, nicely organized. And the time spent could be literally a day on site, not more. It shouldn't be more than a day, quite frankly. If you have your act together, if you have things automated and organized. So I'm going to talk about this automation and organization, okay, in the next slide, and it can make your life so much easier. Hopefully you won't have any compliance issues and violations and fines and so on. So at a high level, this is what it looks like. I'm going to break these components down, especially the bottom one, because that's the most complicated one. So what you're looking at is, this is the actual evidence collection process. Some things are easy, some things are not so easy. So, turning on log data, transactional log data, that's easy to do. You can just go, turn it on, and it runs, okay? And of course, just turning it on, that's great, but you have to watch for it. Nobody turns it off. So you have to set alarms and so on to make sure that it's not off. And you also have to show to the auditors that, hey, not only I turned it on 6 months ago, I checked it on a weekly basis and it was still on. And here's the result of that. And oh, by the way, there are no breaks in the log file. So that's another automation piece you have to write, of course, to be able to show that. AWS service logs, right? Those are S3 logs, RDS logs, Lambda functions. So all of those are here. That's, again, easy to do. You can just turn it on. Host-based logs, right? So on your server, you get the server logs. There's some, audit logs, people logging in the application server, and so on and so forth. Those are also easy to find and kind of easy to copy files over, keep track of them, and so on. I mean, not too hard. Probably a little bit harder than just turning on the log files in the Amazon server, and that's just a click of a button. This one, you have to write some automation to be able to move those files over. But that's, again, part of your evidence collection process, and you need to collect and organize. The last one is machine metadata and related configuration changes, limits reached, and so on and so forth. What is this all about? Well, this is really getting into the heart of Amazon, and it's really getting into core security principles, and that's a lot of raw data that comes out, but you can turn it into business data if you have the expertise in-house, or if you source the expertise to be able to pull all that in. So again, all this data most of it is not usable. Usable in the sense that it's usable, that it's part of your evidence, but you need to make some business sense of it, which requires evidence analysis, right? That's the second box on your left-hand side. So analysis requires, expertise in compliance, expertise in security, expertise in AWS, and map all that together, and you should be able to generate a evidence-based compliance reporting that will have a very simple metric, pass or fail, right? And it will also have risk ratings as well. So it will say risk is high, medium, and low, and you can show that to your auditor as well, that this is what you have. Okay, and so this leads me to an example now, right? So you must be saying, well, okay, guys, this is all great that you talked about this metadata and so on. Can you show me some examples? Yeah, I'm going to show you two examples that you can relate to real quick. Right, first one is virtual private cloud, right? So how do you audit the virtual private cloud? Okay. So first of all, the virtual private cloud has things like routing tables, network ACLs, access control lists, and security groups are tied to that as well as part of your IAM process. And obviously, you need to have your flow logs and CloudTrail, the AWS config, and even Trusted Advisor running on your VPC. That's pretty standard stuff that you can do pretty quickly. It doesn't take that much effort. It's easy to turn on. It does require, log correlation. It does require setting up alarms and logs and so on. I actually have a slide on that which talks about this. And it requires some automation, but it requires integration and analysis, of course. So that's something that you should be doing as part of your activity. However, you also need to look at VPC from all these different conditions that I've written down on the right-hand side. Everything from unused VPC and red gateways to see if you're using managed NAT gateways for AWS, or if you have these network rules that they're too widely open or too narrowly set. So you have to look at those unrestricted ACL inbound traffic and outbound traffic. You have to enable flow logs for VPCs for the subnets. That's something people miss. And you have to look at things like VPC peering cross accounts. So that's generally not a good security practice. So you need to watch for that. And you have to look at unused virtual private gateways, and if you're reaching limits on your VPC gateways. So you have like 5, and that's something you need to watch out for. So all of these different tests are actual controls. These are compliance-specific controls that you need to run and get a response back. And then you have to rate those from a risk rating perspective. That is the risk high, or the risk is low, or the risk is medium. And if I want to pass or fail that particular condition for the compliance test. So that's something that you need to do, and you need to write these custom controls, right? And so how do you do that? Well, Amazon provides us what is called APIs, and they also provide CLI, command line interface. And you can actually run these commands and get a response back and a record and so on. Generally, CLI is not a good method. You should write your own APIs. You should write your own API scripts and automate and run these scripts every hour on the hour, depending on how large of your AWS infrastructure is and how it's changing. Again, writing these APIs and these security rules, compliance rules, requires, I would say, expert understanding of AWS security at the component level. So this whole new area, and it's not actually new anymore. I mean, people are writing these codes, and that's called compliance as code. So that is a big thing right now that's going on. So what I want to do at this point is take a little bit of a pause and ask you guys, if you are writing these compliance as code automation as part of your compliance or security process, or just to check overall posture of the AWS accounts, how well you're doing. So I have the polls open on the right, and if you guys can just respond to those polls, that'll be great. I see some of these numbers changing. Okay, that's interesting. So again, this is about writing these automations. Okay, I'm just gonna go ahead and close the poll, which is really interesting. And you'll see the results in front of you. I mean, none of you said that you're writing these rules. So that's something that you guys need to invest in. You guys need to look at. You guys need to just do some Googling to see who's writing these rules and how effective they are. There's some rules that are written on GitHub that you can actually download and use. These are all these JavaScript files that people have written. And certainly, companies, a few companies, not too many, that are writing these rules, that they can actually license these rules to you, or license their portal that you can run the entire process. And of course, we're definitely one of them. So yeah, so that's an example of a rule. Now, perhaps VPC might be more of a challenging example. So let me just talk about a more basic example, being S3 buckets. Okay, so S3, this is your log file and other data is stored here, and this one, it can get very complex. Aside from, okay, well, I had the S3 bucket, encryption turned on. What else do I need to worry about? Well, you need to worry about the fact that what kind of controls are on there from an authentication perspective. Is it full control? Is it read-only? Is it global setting to set on? Is it publicly accessible? Okay, and is the versioning turned on? Because compliance calls for making sure that you have data integrity. And if someone accidentally deletes your S3 bucket, at least you have a version back that's sitting here. And if it needs to be a high availability, then you need to have multi-zone turned on as well. You need to make sure that transport is secure and the server-side encryption is strong. So all of these things that you need to basically look at, things like multi-factor authentication turned on or not. So all of these tests require you to basically write your own rules. Amazon is not going to tell you this. Actually, they are going to tell you indirectly. They are telling you indirectly to make sure that, hey, do enable MFA and make sure your logging is good. You should have versioning. They will tell you, but you have to read hundreds of articles to actually get all this information, and then try to synthesize and get it into a bunch of rules that you can run every hour on your S3 buckets to make sure that your health is good, and you're not doing something that you're violating certain rules for compliance. That's really the best way. So again, there are companies out there that are writing these rules that you can investigate in. So this kind of gives you the level of complexity that's involved in making sure that not only you're secure, but are you compliant? And you have to pull all this data together and be able to demonstrate, to an auditor that yes, you are absolutely doing your work. So, next slide really kind of spells it out at the end of the day. So after all that data collection that you're doing with log files, with metadata, with everything, you should be able to organize that into a simple spreadsheet like this, which says, okay, data privacy by design, Article 25, this is what it says. And oh, by the way, I have ran these 8, 10, 20, 50 control sets, right? So control sets for access control, and that could have multiple tests in it. So I'm showing in red, green, blue. The blue is the total number of tests. So, you can tell the auditor, hey, I ran 129 tests and 29 passed and 100 of them failed. But hopefully when he comes around, you'll have that 100 down to maybe 10 failed or less. And then, the auditor is going to say, okay, fine, show me the 100 that actually failed. So you should be able to click on this 100 and be able to do a drill down of what those access control tests were, right? And then be able to drill down further to actually show the data. Okay, so is this? I just have a quick question from Kevin Miller. Is some of this audible from a CASB? Is that better or worse than doing it in AWS? Okay, so CASB products do a very actually veneer of that. So CASB is all about your data layer. It doesn't do the infrastructure layer in general. Now, CASB vendors are slowly starting to mature and add few little capabilities for infrastructure control, but quite frankly, none of them that I know have nowhere near the automation that's needed, to be able to, do this. So I'm not sure the question about is better or worse than doing it in AWS. So you have to do this in all cloud vendors. I'm just giving an example specifically for AWS. So you have to demonstrate this level of transparency to your to your auditors. And quite frankly, it's not even about transparency to your auditors. It's about protecting your network. It's about protecting your data and your customer. At the end of the day, it's your customer and it's your brand that's at risk. So that's what we're talking about here. So I think hopefully by now you guys are realizing that there is a missing link in the AWS security process. They tell you all these things, but you have to write the automations for them. Because you can't obviously humanly scan all these configurations or rely on AWS config or log files alone to be able to grade and analyze your infrastructure. So that's really the summary. That's kind of what I want to kind of bring it at home with you guys, so you understand that. Center for Internet Security, I do want to bring this up because if nothing else, you guys should be at least minimum, because you must be saying to yourself, well, we're not expert in S3, we're not expert in VPC. What is it that we can do now that can protect us very, very quickly? At minimum, if nothing you're doing, I would say at least invest in CIS AWS benchmarks controls. And these about 44 AWS controls that was published. And if you just Google CIS AWS benchmark, this PDF file will come up with 160 pages that has all the CLI commands for all of these things that I'm listing here. I've only listed like 16 of these test controls, everything from authorized API calls to AWS config changes. So all of that is part of your 44 AWS controls. At least start with these, and you can submit these as evidence to your regulators to say, look, we got 44 controls we're monitoring, and this is the result of it. And of course, you have to do the grading, of those high, medium, low risk grading, and so on and so forth. I just have another poll surrounding that. I just wanted to know how many of you out there are actually using these set of, this CIS controls. So again, keep in mind, and not the OS hardening controls, because many of them do use center printer security controls for hardening, but purely for AWS published result. That's what I'm interested in. Okay. All right. So let's see what we got. Numbers are still changing. I'll give it another 2-3 seconds. And let me just kind of like end the poll here at this point. Okay, so 25% of you said yes, you are using the CIS AWS control. That's a great news to me. I mean, and of course, it's also validity that these are valuable controls that customers are finding. 50% said no, we're not using them, and 25% aren't sure. So at least half of you for sure are not using this. I would get familiar with this right away, because this is the underpinning of writing these metadata scripts to actually get these results back and tell you what's happening in your infrastructure, and using that as your driving force for the evidence collection process, and of course making sure that you are secure. Now, by the way, all these companies that we're showing here that were hacked, none of them would have been hacked if the 44 controls were in place. None of them. And our guys have looked at it. So that's really what it comes down to. Okay, so a quick summary is you have legal responsibility, organizational responsibilities, and technical responsibilities as part of your AWS GDPR compliancy. From a technical side, you have to build your collection expertise. You have to pay attention to encryptions and audit trails, and you have to monitor every hour on the hour. And you certainly should be writing these controls more and more and start getting comfortable with them, because that's just part of the show. I mean, that's not going to change. And with that, I kind of wanted to spend a little bit of time on this top 10 controls. Most of it you guys would know, but again, 44 controls of CIS is definitely the main. But these are the starting points. The top 10 are the starting point. So when you're using identity access management, make sure you don't use a root account. Okay, that's also very important. Your billing information is up to date, and 1 in 3 customers we see that have root API keys enabled, which is not a good thing. Review permissions and use strong passwords. And also in your groups and policies, you should be able to divide those as much as possible and segregate to reduce your blast radius if one of the security groups did get compromised. Enable multi-factor authentication. That's something you should be doing right off the bat for those, at least for the administration accounts. You should definitely have this thing turned on, because even if it's hacked, with MFA, you can protect your environment. Okay, from a security group standpoint, this is the foundation of security, of course, in AWS security groups and IAM. And if you have a 3-tier architecture, so for example, within the application tier, you should be using SSH to access the application tier, which acts as a Bayesian jump drive. So this is all part of your security group, can enable that, and you should never have your EBS volume or database tier open to public or open to outside. And if third party needs to have access to that, then you should use the simple token service, which I'll talk about in a minute. And you should also have the AWS WAF product turned on, which is the web application firewall, or any other third party web application firewall. You should have a secure AMI machine. So all the images that you have, make sure they're hardened. You have ran vulnerability scanning on those. and you have a process in place. Make sure that the password-only access to host is disabled, right? You should be using SSH keys, which I just talked about. And really question why people need root access. They really shouldn't have to if they have SSH keys to get to the root. 30% of customer OS hardened their AMIs, just FYI. Encrypt your data. Encryption is easy. You can just turn it on within Amazon. But what is not easy is making sure that the TLS is set to the right cipher levels, making sure that your keys are rotated, and so on and so forth. All that requires automation scripts you need to write to be able to test for those conditions, to be able to save that data. So keep that in mind. 7 is monitor unauthorized access. And again, the unauthorized access is around CloudTrail, CloudWatch, but you have to set up a metric filter, okay? And you have to assign a metric, you have to create an alarm, you have to test the alarm, and you have to, of course, get the event, and you have to do something about it. So there's like a couple of steps involved, not just turning on log files. Okay, simple token service for vendors. So this is for third-party guys who want to get into your AWS environment and want to see what's going on, and all these third-party folks that are building products, and of course, we cloud noses are no different. We are too. That actually go in and analyze your infrastructure and generate all the reports and do all the monitoring. So we use a thing called security token service. That's an Amazon best practice to allow third parties to get in safely into your account and to be able to get that. These are temporary credentials that only active for a minute or two, and then they expire. So really, really good way of securing your environment. S3 buckets, not enough can be said about this. So making sure that they're not open to public, making sure that you have the access control lists regularly reviewed, and again, you have to write automation to be able to monitor the health of your AWS buckets. And if you want to find PII data in there, then run the Amazon Macy service that can do that for you. And then, in general, conduct vulnerability assessment overall, do benchmarking, making sure that, you guys are at par. So at the end of the day, it's not so much what rules you know, what security policies and process you write, because those security operating procedures and policies, honestly, they're getting obsolete. Because by the time you write them, you approve them, you train them, it's just too late. And people can't execute on it because you need to have those security operation procedures into little scripts that run every hour on the hour. So automation is a new norm in the cloud, which really drives enforcement and accountability from all angles. So with that, hopefully you guys get a good flavor of what's happening in the space and where the industry is moving towards and why. And also, if you need any help or anything, just call us. We can give you more guidance on that. Just a quick 2-minute introduction on Cloud Gnosis and what we do. So we're a platform company that provides continuous security and compliance scanning, everything from alert management. We have complete remediation steps when you do have a violation in place. We have done all the hard work for you in terms of taking all these controls, all these regulations, and map them into specific test controls, and then create this beautiful report that says pass, fail, and what the severity, the risk levels are, and all the remediation data that's associated with it. It shows something like this, where we divide the risk groups by high, medium, low, specific categories, and show you all the details. The reports are pretty straightforward. You can have a management level report, or you can have a practitioner level report. And we plot all this, with geolocations across the board, so you know where the violations are, and we have details around specific set of regulations like PCI, HIPAA, and others, and details out all the violations and where they're located. And also a quick summary of your assets, what the attack surface looks like, and there's a health dashboard that shows you how's your compliance history postures going over time. So are you improving on that? Are you not improving? Are you stagnant? So it kind of gives you a metric of where you're going. We also have a capability around shutting off machines to reduce attack surface when they're not in use. And that can produce some cost savings for you as well. So there's some reporting analytics around that. So summary, what we learned today is, GDPR cloud security has this shared responsibility model. You need to have automation in place to be able to build your compliance posture and reporting and demonstrate compliance. Third-party risk management we talked about with the AWS, those 44 control sets. And also you should have your DevOps basically fully integrated into this flow. Make sure that whatever they're launching, it's compliant to what we just talked about. And you should have KPIs that you should be setting through automation. So hopefully you're writing a few scripts that can keep track of where you are in your cloud benchmarking process and exactly where you're failing and where you're doing well. At minimum, we talked about the AWS CIS 44 controls. For starters, you should absolutely be having those running. And then, of course, the very last exercise is you should create a baseline and benchmark your AWS platform either manually or through some third-party company like us. We can also grade it, or you could self-grade it by just creating a trial and running a CIS report on your platform. So with that, I'm going to open up the chat box and any questions, folks. Sorry, we had to cut in the middle with some technical difficulties of some slide movement, but looks like we got majority of the people back on during that. So questions? Okay. I have a question here. Where can I get these rules that you talked about and start writing them? So I think a good place to start would be to, I mean, these rules are not in some central place. You have to read some documentation, set of documentation within Amazon Cloud. I would say Google it a little bit, just type S3 health checks or how to audit VPC controls or, those types of, Google find. And even go to GitHub and type type the word security signature. Okay, so all of those is going to result in a bunch of things that you can start triangulating and say, okay, yeah, I like this test or that test, and start organizing your test. But I think the minimum is, instead of going through all this manual effort, the best is just to go look at those CIS 44 controls, because I think that should be your starting point in your journey. Because if you don't understand those rules, and if you don't have them implemented, then doing a health check on a S3 bucket is not. I mean, it's really down the path. I think first you need to do the basics, make sure that your identity access management, your passwords, your multi-factor authentication, and all of those things are set before anything. So I hope that kind of answers that question. Question around companies like Newsys, can they do these types of tests? So Newsys, just like any other security company out there, they built products for traditional data center, which means they do what is called inline traffic flow analysis. So traffic comes in through load balancers. It goes into your application, and it's basically IP-based and traffic-based. It doesn't formulate very well into the cloud, because cloud, you have IPs that are changing, and you have containers that are just way out there. And also, it doesn't do anything with your infrastructure layer of Amazon. It only does just the traffic piece of it. It only does very little, which is the IP based. So it's more of an OWASP type testing on your application, and it's very limited. So I'm not saying Newsys is a bad product or anything like that. I'm just saying that what it does it very well, and you should use it for that. But security is a layered approach. It's a defense in depth. So you have to use those principles and look at tools outside of that. Maybe just to ask, those vendors, what are they doing in AWS Cloud at the infrastructure level, and how are they protecting VPCs and RDSs and so on and so forth. So that's probably what you should be doing. What's the pricing of your product? Pricing is actually on the web. You can actually check it out. So it's on average it's $100 per account for the AWS account. We don't go by users or number of VMs. You could have 10,000 VM in one AWS account, just one price. It's about $100. So that's pretty straightforward. Okay. So do you license these scripts for us to use? So we license our platform, and right now in our platform, you cannot see the source code for those signatures, but people are asking for them. So in light of transparency in our next release, we are going to give you actual script source code that we run on your infrastructure, and you can see exactly what we run. But you'll be able to copy it in our platform, and you'll be able to modify it in our platform, and you'll be able to save it in our platform. And you can certainly export it, of course, right? Just cut, paste it out, and export it if you like. No big deal. So yeah, so the answer is not right now out of the box, but I would say give it another, I would say about 2.5 months away. You'll have access to that. Okay. All right. I don't see, some are basic questions, which I'm not going to answer because it might bore some of you. I don't see any other questions that are of interest. Oh, yeah, so NIST. So, yeah, so the question is around, is NIST better than COVID and so on? So, net, okay, NIST is the master standard, okay? The COVID and others are kind of not outdated, but they're just not going to be used as much. I'll give you this data point. So Gartner is saying that 25% of all organizations within the U.S. are already NIST compliant, and another 25% will be compliant, reach 50% by the end of 2020. So within 2 years, we'll have 50% of U.S. companies that are NIST compliant. So that kind of says a lot. And also, Trump has signed the executive order, President Trump, on the making sure that all agencies are NIST compliant. So that kind of says it all. Most of the U.S. companies and also government agencies are NIST compliant, so there's no reason why they should not be following that standard. Okay, so I think we spent about a good amount of time, and I don't want to take too much of your time, but please send us an email at info@cloudgnosis.com. We can send you a copy of the presentation and certainly answer any of your questions. You will be getting a replay link in about a day or so, and just please go ahead and forward it to your friends and kind of get their feedback. This is a groundbreaking space for us and for the industry. Very few players are doing this, so look forward to your feedback. Thank you all, and you guys have a great day.